Hello, this is Michael Tillinger. This is a follow-up video to the Donald Trump takes over the Fed video that's had quite a response. I'm quite blown away. Thank you for all the positive messages and also for all those that are very unconscious and not aware what's going on. For all the people that have responded negatively to this and are confused about how I can make these outlandish statements like, where's your proof? Where's the evidence? I haven't read about this anyway. Well, just please think about what you're saying. Of course you're not going to read about this anyway. Of course you're not going to see this on the 8 o'clock news. This is not going to happen. This is the most fiercely guarded secret right now in the Rothschild banking empire. It's the most fiercely guarded secret that Donald Trump has managed to wrestle the control away from the Rothschild empire. The first time anyone has been able to do this in the last 250 years without any fanfare or major confrontation or conflict. Donald Trump very carefully and cunningly and strategically simply took the Fed under the wing of the United States government into the Treasury Department and didn't make any big scene about it, didn't say the Fed is disgusting and expose the Rothschild banking empire because nobody would have understood it. In fact, people would have called Donald Trump a conspiracy theorist if he started going down that route, which they do to people like me and many others because they don't have enough information. So once you know what's going on and you start reading between the lines, it's very easy to realize what has happened here. Where's the evidence? Where's the evidence? Everybody, so many people are asking. The evidence is everywhere. All you got to do is go online and Google the mainstream media and read the articles that they've given us on a platter. But you've got to have the capacity to connect the dots. If you can't connect the dots from what you read in the different mainstream media articles, where they fudge the information, they hide this, they hide that, but every now and then they give us one line or two sentences here and there where they give the game away, they spill the beans. If you can recognize those gifts, those little treasures that are hidden in there, you can connect the dots, you see very clearly what's going on. The other important thing that I'm going to talk about here is the origins of money and really show people and explain to people what money is, where it comes from, how it was created, by whom, when, and how the origins of money is very, very different from what anybody could have ever imagined. A lot of the main stories actually come from the mainstream media. And this is the really important thing. This is the thing that I would like everybody to pay attention to. If you're interested in getting to the bottom of this and try and unravel this and figure it out for yourself, connect the dots for yourself. Because ultimately, if you can connect the dots for yourself, you'll get a lot more satisfaction that you were able to see it yourself, that you're not just taking some schmuck's word for it on the internet and on YouTube, because it literally becomes so obvious. Once you see the connections and how the mainstream media are giving us the clues, they're giving us the pieces of the puzzle, it becomes very simple and obvious to connect those dots and to complete the bigger picture with the scattered pieces of the puzzle that lie around, right? So let's just remind ourselves here. We have to do what the guys in CSI do. We have to follow the clues and the evidence. And based on the clues and the evidence we get, and the clues and the evidence is really well hidden. So based on the clues and the evidence we get, we can start putting it together. So go out there and Google this and search far and wide, and you'll start seeing the mainstream media notices and headlines about the Fed merging with the Treasury Department of the USA. That is the overwhelming message that was sent through the mainstream media. There was also quite a lot of information written and several articles leading up to Larry Fink becoming part of the Fed's advisory or the main advisor for the Fed once it was brought in to the Treasury Department. The mainstream media is not going to spell it out for you. The mainstream media is not going to tell you that Donald Trump took over the Federal Reserve Bank. This is the last thing they will ever do. In fact, they will probably throw out all kinds of obstacles and hurdles for people to try and figure this out for themselves. They will fudge the information. They will do all kinds of things, and they will continue confusing the people so people can't figure it out. The other really important thing that I need to just stress, especially for people that are new to this, if you don't know the origins of money, the origins of banking, the origins of the modern banking system, the Rothschild banking empire, because that's what we have today. We are trapped in the Rothschild banking empire that run and control the world, virtually the entire world, with a few exceptions. There's a battle going on for the control of the world. The Rothschilds have been running the world and have won that battle a long time ago, some 250 years ago in the late 1700s, around 1760, when they imposed their banking empire on the world. And since then, it's been impossible to escape that. By now, you know from the previous video that they put in their puppet leaders. Every country that they take control of, they first depose the president or assassinate them, or it's always a plane crash or a massive heart attack or something that happens. Then they put their own puppet master or a puppet leader that does exactly what he is told. Obviously, it's for reward. They bribe these people, or often they threaten these people and they extort these people. And they tell them, if you don't do this, then we're going to kill your family or whatever it is. And this is why I say that this is the largest organized crime syndicate in the world, and they have more blood on their hands than any other organized crime syndicate, because they provide the funding through which all organized crime syndicates run and manage themselves. It's the money that funds all organized crime on earth. And the Rothschilds provide the tools and the mechanism for all organized crime to exist and to operate. It is a spectacular deception right in front of our eyes. So once again, money and banking and finance is not a noble industry. It's a bunch of gangsters with more blood on their hands than anybody else. The mainstream media is not going to report on it because they're owned by the same Rothschild banking empire, or some subsidiary of it, or somebody somewhere that is ultimately controlled by the Rothschild has taken control of most of the global media. And they will not tell you that they've just lost their gold, the largest central bank on earth, to Donald Trump. They're not going to, certainly not going to broadcast that. So we have to read between the lines and figure this out. And like I mentioned, just go and do your own research and you'll see all the information is out there. And it's a beautiful story. Once you figure it out for yourself, you'll feel a great sense of pleasure and achievement that you could piece the puzzle pieces together and connect the dots together for yourself. So let's talk about what is money. What is money? Where does money come from? Why do we use it? When did money first appear on earth? All the arguments that I've got from putting out the video on Donald Trump takes control of the Fed, most of the arguments against this notion or this event that took place came and keeps coming from mainstream educated people that have got some sort of an education in commerce or finance, or they've come through some business school at some university, and they were taught, their textbooks taught them the steps that they obviously want them to learn, or be very good students and regurgitate the information very, very well. And that's how you pass, by regurgitating the stuff in the textbooks. Because you're not going to pass if you come with a whole different theory and you start talking about, no, the money comes and this, it doesn't work like that, of course, then you're not going to pass. So everybody in the banking, finance, commerce industry today, anything to do with the financial markets, everyone has come through the same financial and banking and money school. And this is why they're all equally poisoned. This is why their minds are all equally poisoned. They can't think outside the box. So it's really important, if you're one of those people, and this is a big shock to your system, that you're able to step outside of that box and take some very important information on board that will help you, clear some of that clutter that you've gathered throughout your life as you progress through your career and get to a certain level. Now, you're involved in this money making and banking and financial industry, and you're just in the machine. You don't really think about what drives it and who's behind it. Just think about the fact that central banks are operating outside of the legal system or outside of the jurisdiction of every government around the world, with the exception possibly of Russia and China and one or two other countries like North Korea, possibly Cuba, and there might be one or two others, but the rest have all been brought in through invading the countries, toppling the governments, toppling the leaders, and then installing the central bank and then bringing that country into the Rothschild banking empire. And this is why we've had all these wars and invasions, and it just never stopped. Just imagine how our governments are constantly borrowing money from these central banks that we call the Reserve Bank or Federal Reserve Bank or central banks of all our countries. So we're constantly borrowing money from a third party. We're borrowing money from a company that does not belong to the people, does not belong to the government, is not in control or not controlled by the government or under the control of the people. That is an insane idea. Why would we ever want to do anything like that? Why would we allow an external force, an external entity over which we have no control? Why would we ever allow such an entity to control our countries, control our governments, control our financial systems, and control our lives? From the first breath we take to the last breath we breathe out, we are controlled by money. Clearly, that is an unimaginable thing. So we would never agree to do that. So this activity by the central banks and the way they work has been forced upon us without us realizing it. Most people have no idea that central banks are not part of the government, that central banks operate outside of the legal and jurisdiction systems of each country. So just think about this. The central banks, they don't have armies. That's why once you take control of the central bank and you have control of your army, that Rothschild empire can do nothing about it unless they send the army of another country under the pretense that you're doing something terrible, and they invade your country and topple you. So now we know that this is what's happened in the USA. Donald Trump took control of the Fed. He's in control of the military. So no one else is going to invade the USA to take back the Fed and take control of the Fed and replace Donald Trump with another president. They try to do it from within, but as you can see, it is turning into an incredibly critical battle for the survival of humanity and the survival of the world right now. Because if Donald Trump and the current resistance against the Rothschild empire in the USA, if that fails, we go back to square one, and I think it's game over. So a lot hangs on the success of the Fed remaining in the hands of Trump and what they do with that to improve the lives of the people in the USA and let that become a knock-on effect for every other country. And this is why I said in the other video, is that Donald Trump has really shown every leader of the world, every leader of every world who feels pressurized by the central bank, by the Rothschilds empire, the World Health Organization, the World Trade Organization, the United Nations, all these agencies that have been set up by the Rothschilds, they're all controlled by the same money mafia around the world. If they're presidents and leaders of countries that feel pressurized by these agencies, now is the time to get out of it. Now is the time to get out of it. Just take the Fed or your Reserve Bank under the control of your government and the Treasury Department or whatever department in your government manages the money. And very little is going to happen from the Rothschild side to resist that, because they just can't do that. They have no money. They have no... They have loads of money. They have no military. The only thing they can do is throw money at it. So let's backtrack a little bit. Just imagine. So here we got a central bank operating outside of the legislation of a country. And they're giving the country all the money. Where does the central bank get all its money from? Where do they get all the wealth from to be able to give a whole country money? How is that possible? When you start thinking about this and contemplating the situation, you realize very quickly that it is completely impossible. It's untenable, impossible, unimaginable. This should never happen and cannot happen, because how can a company, which is really just a piece of paper, it's an idea. A corporation is an idea that's written on a piece of paper. So how can a piece of paper and an idea whose idea it is that we in this corporation control the making, the distribution, and the control of money around the world, how this corporation can control an entire country of 300+ million people, all the things those people do, they create, they invent, they manufacture, they grow, all the things that people do every day is controlled by this company called the central bank. You realize that there's a problem. They have nothing. They have the idea and the right to create money and to start distributing money and to control the distribution of money. That's all they have. And they protect that right through the military of the country, where the people believe that they're actually protecting their own rights. It is just insane. It's incredible how they spun this incredible lie over us and just wove us into the story. And we are the guys that protect their rights. We protect their right to continue enslaving us, taxing us, putting inflation on everything we do, destroying our lives, and funding the criminal organizations that destroy our countries. So the fact that the Rothschild banking empire, the central banks, have nothing other than an idea and the right that they've claimed for themselves through power and controlling the armies, they have nothing, means that the moment we take control of the central bank, or the idea of the central bank, and bring it into the treasury of our countries, there's very little they can do. Now the question is, what's the difference between a central bank owned by the Rothschilds and what I've called a people's bank? And there is a huge difference between a Rothschild-owned central bank and a people's bank that is controlled by the people, owned by the people, and managed by a government who's a representative and a servant of the people. The differences are so vast that the banks don't even resemble each other in any way whatsoever. Because think about the country as your family. If the country is our family and we look after each other in our family and we do everything for each other, money really is just a tool, some form of weird tool of exchange that we use to get things done, because we can't always exchange eggs for cheese or a car for a tractor or whatever. So we use money to do that exchange. Now, if the bank is a true people's bank, and by the way, there have been several ideas and examples of this in the last 120 years around the world, and they were so successful that they became an absolute threat to the Rothschild empire, the banking empire. So those countries were very swiftly removed or overthrown. The presidents and the leaders were overthrown, and the Rothschild central bank was imposed and replaced the People's Bank that made those countries prosperous and successful beyond anybody's imagination. So the Rothschilds could not allow that to continue, because that was an absolute threat to their global control. So once we have a People's Bank, the money that we create belongs to us. So if I borrow money from myself, I don't have to pay myself back, right? So if we start doing things for each other, and this is really where it starts to come towards the contributionism philosophy, where we contribute our collective or our individual talents and our individual skills and talents towards the collective benefit of everyone. It's not a one-to-one exchange, it's a one-to-many exchange. I contribute my skills and talents into the pool of my community so that everyone in my community can benefit from it. I'll talk more about it a bit later. So right now, if we have the ability to create our own money for everything we do and everything we need, that means that if we need to build a railway line from here to there, we make the money available so that we can pay the people to build the railway line. And anything that we do should work on that very simple principle. There's no inflation, there's no tax, there's no VAT, there are no fees or levies or of any kind, because all these taxes and inflation and levies and fees only exist because we are borrowing money, or the money is enforced and imposed on us by a central bank that is an independent institution operating outside of the legislation and the jurisdiction. And they charge our government an interest. And they pretty much control the financial activities of our countries. The moment we eradicate that central bank, We take control of how much money we create, when we want to create it, how we want to create it, and for what we need it to use it. And that's what we do. Now, at one stage, there's probably going to be a time when we realize that we don't really even need that money. And I know this might come as a shock to some people, but if you just sit back and realize that money does nothing, right? You can put $1 million on the table and say, right, there's $1 million. Now we need to build a bridge over this river. Well, unless people get up off their asses and start building that bridge, or find the engineers and the civil engineers that know how to build a bridge, that money is going to remain on that table and is not going to achieve anything. It is people that do things. So people do things and achieve things. Money does nothing. People do everything. Just keep that in mind. We plant the seeds, we grow the food, we build the bridges, and we invent everything we do. And money constantly gets in the way of us and our dreams and our skills and abilities to achieve what it is that we want to do for ourselves, for our communities, for our families, for humanity as a whole. So the moment people start to realize that, okay, well, we want to build a bridge across this river, and we need $1 million, and say, well, if we don't have $1 million, we can't build the bridge. Well, what if we have all the skills and the materials already available to us? Can we build that bridge? The answer is yes, we can. So if we need the bridge, are we going to build it, or are we going to just sit and wait until some money arrives so we can distribute the money for whatever reason we may think we need it? The answer to that is very interesting, because we'll probably build the bridge and then figure out how we're going to get the money, but at least we'll have the bridge. But the moment you start working through this process, and this is what happened to me in 2005 or 2004, when I realized that money was introduced as a complete and finite, already evolved tool of enslavement to humanity. The exact way that we use money today was introduced some 6,000 years ago to humanity. And we're still using it in exactly the same format it was introduced to humanity many thousands of years ago. So once people realize that money does nothing, people do everything, I believe that we're going to start moving away from the use of money very quickly. And this is where the one small town strategy comes in. One small town can change the world, where ultimately we'll start moving, we'll start generating so much money in our communities and finding that we don't really need to use that money because everything is available to us all the time. And suddenly we realize, okay, we've got all the food, the technology, everything, the healthcare, the arts and culture, and yet we're not using the money that we're generating because we make everything available to us, to ourselves for free, because we're the ones creating it, right? If you create something for yourself or grow stuff in your garden, in your family, you're not going to charge yourself for the food you grow in your garden, right? This is what I was leading up to earlier when I said, imagine the world as your family. So if we grow food for our family, no matter where it is, we're not going to charge ourselves for the food because we're growing it for ourselves. And then you start to realize how insane money is as an idea. I'm going to finish with the origins of money and where money comes from and how insane it is. So the key thing here is that anyone that comes from a mainstream education system finds it very difficult to comprehend that money was created and introduced as a tool of enslavement and a slavery system. This is what we need to overcome. And I'm beginning to find a lot of very conscious millionaires and billionaires are crawling out of the woodwork now, realizing that the way we've been living and we've been building and our society, the structure of our society through capitalism and greed and gluttony and hoarding and all this stuff, it just doesn't work. It's not a solution. There is, whichever way you look at it, there is not a pretty outcome or a pretty end to that story. It always ends in bloodshed, violence, conflict. It is a mess. So a lot of these conscious billionaires, through this disgusting attack on our human freedom, our liberties, and our sovereignty, this global lockdown that we've been shoved into, and realizing that most of our leaders and presidents, people that we put our trust and faith in, most of them are actually just dictators that are controlled by some higher order. And that higher order would be the global banking industry, the Rothschild financial empire that control our governments through the banks and the money. So many of these billionaires are realizing that we have to find something new because we can't go back to what we had. It's fundamentally broken. It's broken. It cannot be fixed. So we have to do something else. And we can't fight the system because the entire system was created to destroy and annihilate anything that rises up to fight it. So that's what the money system does. That's why some people call it the Babylonian black magic money system. It's imbued with some really dark black magic energies for those that believe in that kind of stuff. It is quite scary. Just imagine how many millions and billions of people wake up every morning and have great intentions. They want to do good things. They want to do good things for the world. Beautiful, pure intentions with their skills and talents that will benefit the world, that will help their community, help their family, help the world as at large. And yet these billions of people with these amazing intentions for life hardly ever succeed with these brilliant intentions. Something fundamentally wrong with that, because in the field of statistical probability, in a world of 8 billion people, where most of the people want to do good stuff in the world, very few good things happen, and very few of those good intentions come to fruition. So there's clearly something wrong. The odds are stacked incredibly against the goodness of human nature and people with great intentions around the world. The odds are stacked against all of us that want to do those things so that we somehow cannot succeed. And that thing, that tool that prevents us from succeeding is money. It is always a thing called money. No matter, you can come this close for doing something incredible, and then suddenly the last little bit, you need the final $10,000 or final few payments to finish something great you've been working on for 20 years, and suddenly it all crumbles and falls apart and you lose everything that you've been working for all your life. We can now see it through this lockdown and how millions of people's lives have been destroyed. Millions and millions of businesses around the world that people work for all their lives are falling flat, are being destroyed through the lockdown. It is a malicious intent, not only to destroy our spirit, to destroy our human nature, our integrity, the human instinct to help each other, to support each other. In South Africa, we can't even help our neighbors if they're starving. You need a permit to help your neighbors with food, or people in the community that need money, people that are hungry and starving. You can't even go out there and help them. You get arrested and thrown in jail for wanting to help your fellow man. That's how bad it's become. So I've been ranting and raving for long enough now about all this stuff, but I think it's really important for everyone to realize how inextricably and evilly connected all this dark stuff is. And yet there is a very bright shining light at the end of this dark and gloomy tunnel, and I'll talk about it right at the end. But so let's quickly talk about the origins of money, how we got here, why is it so bad, how come we got all these very powerful individuals running around, they're not running around, all these powerful individuals in control of the world, and people running around like lost bloody rabbits and chickens, just wondering what the hell is going on. Why is it so messed up? How come we can't take control of our lives, our situations, our countries? Why are our leaders and our governments always doing the opposite of what we want them to do? Clearly something is wrong with that picture. So let's talk about money. What is money? Where does it come from? How was it created? When does money first appear on earth? And how has it evolved into what it is today that completely controls our lives? Every step of the way, controls our countries, controls our destiny in many ways. And what are we going to do about it to take back that control without any more bloodshed or violence or opposition? This is really the most important thing here. There must be a way for us to get out of this mess without violence, opposition, or conflict. Clearly that method or that approach has not worked for thousands and thousands of years. People have stood up and rose against their leaders or their dictator queens and presidents, and they try and overthrow them, and there's just bloodshed everywhere. Wars have been started by the bankers to put people against each other. They fund both sides of the war, always fund both sides of the war, so they're in absolute control of the situation. You can't imagine for 1 second that a global machine, the global money machine, the Rothschild banking empire that controls everything on this planet of ours. You don't think for 1 second that they'd be stupid enough to allow somebody to wage a war against one of their other territories? Of course not. They're always in absolute control, funding all the sides of all conflicts so that they retain control no matter what happens or who wins the war. So, where does this money thing come from? The first reference and evidence of money that we find has got nothing to do with thousands of years of bartering and trading and exchanging stuff and the fairy tales we've been told at school and then at university. It is a very, very different tale. The first evidence we have of money we find in the Sumerian clay tablets. Sumerian, this very powerful empire down up there in Mesopotamia, where modern day Iraq was. Most of it was Iraq. And that is a lot to do with why Iraq was actually invaded, with a lot of very important ancient knowledge and information, and possibly also ancient advanced technology that was taken and confiscated by the invading forces, the Britain, USA, and all the allies. It looks more and more like it that they actually took control of some very powerful ancient weapons and technology. So the weapons of mass destruction were there, but they were not what we were told by the presidents of the USA and the UK at the time. The weapons of mass destruction are most likely ancient advanced technology and weapons left behind by these very advanced beings that just vanished, seem to have vanished into thin air. So in the Sumerian clay tablets, and for those that are new to this, this is at this stage the oldest written record of human history, and it pretty much brings together all the religions, it brings together all the creations, it brings together all the things that we as humanity have been divided upon, all the lines of religion, divided along those lines of religion, and the conflicts that have been, and the wars have been waged. We find the synergy and where they all come together, the confluence of all these original ideas we find in the Sumerian texts. The Sumerian texts go back, some of the oldest clay tablets, possibly 6,000 years old already, and possibly even older. Difficult to date these clay tablets often, but they are not just thousands or hundreds of thousands, there are millions of these clay tablets. In fact, they are so prevalent that when you drive through the Middle East and the Near East and even Iran, that was also part of that, and this is why there's so much ancient knowledge in countries like Iran and Iraq and Syria and Jordan and Lebanon and all those countries in the Middle East and the Near East. Some of the houses and the huts and the clay buildings built out of clay actually have clay tablets built into the walls of these buildings. When people dig up the mud, dig up the soil, and they make mud, there are clay tablets right there, and they mix them in with the mud and make cement, and then they use it and build it into the walls. That's how many of these clay tablets there are. There are literally millions. Well, thousands and hundreds of thousands have been collected by now, possibly millions. And these are scattered throughout the various museums of the world, mostly the British Museum, the French Museum, obviously the colonizing empires that took control of all those countries. And many of these clay tablets have been translated. And these tablets carry a significant amount of knowledge, pretty much everything to do with the origins of medicine, the origins of architecture, astronomy, of mathematics, of physics, of community, origins of pretty much of cooking, of making wine, of playing music, the first musical scale, musical notes. Most of pretty much everything we find as the origins of humanity, we find in the Sumerian texts, in these clay tablets. We also find the first lawful code, the code of Hammurabi. The first laws that were written down for humanity we find in the Sumerian text, and we see those laws unfold and become what we find the legal system today. So think about this as the foundation of the knowledge we have in the world today. But there's a lot more in these Sumerian clay texts, right? They talk about some very strange and mysterious times on Earth when these other beings were present on Earth. And all this information is obviously locked down, shut down, turned into mythology, so we don't believe that it's true. And this is why we're so dumbed down and we don't know what the hell is going on, and how these people that run the world can constantly pull the wool over our eyes, because we simply don't imagine or believe that anything like this could have possibly happened in ancient times. Well, when you start studying this stuff, you realize that they not only talk about the ancient times and where they get their information from, and they share the information with us, but they also tell us that they got their knowledge and information from a time before time. They tell us that they inherited this knowledge from a much older civilization that was there for hundreds of thousands of years, and they just inherited that knowledge and then wrote it down in these millions of clay tablets, sharing all that knowledge and information with us. Well, some of those Sumerian clay tablets are referred to as the king's lists. These king's lists that list the names of kings that ruled the world for thousands and thousands of years, as far back as 245,000 years. And how long they ruled. Many of these kings ruled for thousands of years. So clearly we have to assume that they weren't human if they ruled for thousands of years. And that opens a whole another door to another rabbit hole that we need, we have to go down at some stage to figure out what the hell was going on. So these kings lists tell us about the flood, when the flood appeared, what the flood did, how it destroyed everything, what happened after the flood. Pretty much every story in the Bible, every biblical story that we find, from the creation of Adam to Noah and the flood to the Ten Commandments to Abraham, pretty much all the stories that we read, Sodom and Gomorrah, we find the similar versions or the original versions, much older versions of what we read in the Bible. We find those in the Sumerian texts. And that really makes things a lot more interesting when you start seeing humanity converging into an ancient time where things were very, very different to what they are today. And we may not have been divided into different religions, but we were controlled by a much more powerful group of advanced beings with very serious tools and weapons of mass destruction with which they could smite and control the people. So these Sumerian texts tell us that there was a time in human history, and it's very difficult to determine exactly when this time was. That's why when you read these Sumerian texts, and when you try and interpret these Sumerian texts, it's very important to keep an open mind and realize that it's virtually impossible to try and put timelines to these, because we're probably way out of line. We have no idea where many of these key timelines actually come into play. But what they do tell us is that there was a time when kingdom was lowered to earth from heaven, and the first priest kings were appointed by the gods, and these priest kings were put in certain parts of the world to rule over humanity. And these were the first priest kings that ruled for so many thousands of years, by the way. And maybe this is where we have Genesis 6:14 telling us that the sons of the gods came down and they saw the daughters of man and they had children with them. And we start seeing that there was some other stuff going on that most people can't even imagine. So these priest kings were appointed by the gods, and they had incredible power. They had weapons of mass destruction with which they could smite the people if the people wouldn't listen. And this is why the people listened to them. And this is where we suddenly see the origins and the very beginning, the genesis of the royal bloodlines on earth. And the reason the people obeyed these first kings, because they were fearful of them. Of course they were fearful of them. These guys were like gods to them. They weren't quite the big gods, but they were like demigods, a mixture between the gods and humans. That's what it seems like from the Sumerian texts. But these kings were given fierce weapons with which to smite the people. So of course they obeyed. Otherwise, it is almost impossible to imagine how the royal bloodlines and the first kingdoms would have come about. It simply doesn't make any sense that such an event or such a global social structure would have been put in place. It just doesn't make any sense. Communities looking after each other with consensus and for the greater benefit of everyone, that is one of the areas that we find in ancient times, how people lived, how they cooperated, collaborated for the benefit of the whole community. This was the social structure that lasted seemingly for thousands of years. And then that got broken when these first priest kings arrived on earth. And suddenly, these priest kings owned all the land belonged to them. All the people had to work for them. They were suddenly their servants and their subjects and their property. Keep in mind, the people were actually the property of these first priest kings and the royal bloodlines. These first priest kings could do with the people as they wanted and what they wanted. And the people would just give in because they feared them. And they had reason to fear them because they saw how powerful they were and what they could do to annihilate and smite the people if they didn't listen. But the other very important thing that happened here is two other things that happened. These first kings built their temples, these huge, very impressive and imposing and scary places with big pillars and temple high walls. It was impenetrable. These temples that these first priest kings lived in were impenetrable to the ordinary people. And from there, they dispensed their justice or their injustice. From there, they did everything they wanted to do. And from there, they also started to distribute and print the first forms of money. That is spectacular. This is the information we get in the Sumerian texts, that the first priest kings suddenly appeared on earth. They built their temples. They smited the people, took control of all the land, turned the people into their slaves. And then from their temples, they started to issue money in the forms of clay tablets, little clay tablets like this. There are some examples of it. You'll see it on the video. And these clay tablets were basically promissory notes for people to bring in their gold, bring in their silver, bring in all their precious metals and everything they had that was precious that these kings wanted to collect. And in return for your silver or your gold or anything else that was desirable by these priest kings, they would give you a piece of clay. And that this clay tablet is actually proof that you handed in your gold. You realize that something is dramatically wrong with this situation. So it becomes very obvious from this that money was introduced to the human race as a finite, a complete, and an evolved tool of enslavement. Money did not evolve over thousands and thousands of years of bartering and trading and people doing good things. Did not evolve out of that kind of situation, that kind of historic event. Money was introduced as a complete and fully evolved a philosophy and an idea that was introduced into humanity as an absolute tool of enslavement. It is not there to help us. It is not there to allow us to achieve our dreams and our goals. In fact, it does exactly the opposite. You should know by now that everything you try and do, every time you have a dream or an idea, or you want to do this or do that, what gets in the way? It's always the money that gets in the way. Somehow bankers have become the guys that can tell us what we can and cannot do, what dreams we can and cannot follow, because unfortunately in this world, if you don't have enough money to do something, it most likely is not going to happen. Whether it's education or something you want to build or achieve or construct, doesn't matter what it is. So what are we going to do about this? How do we get out of the system? Well, this corona pandemic global attack on our liberties, on all our rights, on all our sovereignty, has forced billions of people to contemplate their lives. What is going on? Am I happy with what's happening in my life? Or pushing people right to the brink of death. I mean, there are people that are starving and dying, just not having enough food. So what this is doing in a weird way is like a cleansing of unconsciousness or cleansing of media. People are waking up and realizing that if we don't do something, we might just even die locked up in our own houses, because many of our leaders outside of the United States, who's leading the way, who's spearheading the resistance against the global banking empire and the Rothschild empire, outside of the USA, many of the smaller countries that are not that powerful are completely and utterly controlled and bullied by these global agencies. So many people are realizing we've got to do something. And this is where the one small town philosophy comes in. We can't resist. We cannot fight the system. The system was created and designed to destroy anything or anyone who tries to oppose it. So we have to do something that does not use any violence, opposition, or conflict, or bloodshed, or anything like that. Those are all old paradigm kind of ideas. We have to step out of that. We have to create a new system that makes the current system obsolete. And this is where the one small town can change the world philosophy comes in. It provides us with the absolutely beautiful and simple opportunity to get out of the system, especially in countries where the mayors are elected by the people and the sheriffs are representatives of the people and actually want good for the people. If you live in a country where your mayor is elected by your community, we can do this, and you can do this very quickly and very easily. If your mayor actually wants to do something that's good for his or her community, that is sick and tired of this abuse of our rights and our liberties, community can do something about it very, very quickly. What we do in these situations, we have all the technology, all the investors, all the funding is ready. The technology in the form of alternative electricity. So the town has its own supply of electricity and pretty much becomes independent in all the decisions it makes. This is a very important moment in all of human history. I'd like to recommend that you go onto onesmalltown.org, read all the materials, watch all the videos, immerse yourself in this very simple and beautiful message of abundance and prosperity on every possible level for your community and every other community. The moment we achieve this in one town somewhere in the world, and preferably in one of the first world countries, because I say that because they might not need it as much as the third world countries, but it's the first world countries that the effect will be far more severe, and the effect will spread. Not just, it won't just create a linear domino effect, it'll create a quantum domino effect where this will suddenly start happening in hundreds and thousands of towns in that particular country. It'll spread across borders and then obviously right across the world as people realize that we can take control back in the small towns, not at the government level, not by opposing governments, not by violence, opposition, or conflict. Very simply, taking the tools of enslavement and turning them into tools of liberation. All the stuff that is thrown at us to control us, to suppress us, which includes money itself. And as we take all the stuff that's thrown at us, we turn our communities into cooperative, collaborative places of people working together, cooperating, collaborating, creating, turning our towns into these incredible places of abundance and prosperity. This in itself, this platform that I've just mentioned to you, becomes a very, very attractive opportunity and a very attractive call for conscious millionaires and conscious billionaires and conscious investors who know how treacherous the investment markets are and how volatile they are and how you can lose everything in a day. Suddenly, the one small town where the people create a very strong platform of cooperation and collaboration become the most attractive and lucrative investment opportunities. So not only are we using the tools of enslavement on every level, we're using the attraction of the one small town to bring in the investors. Please go online to onesmalltown.org. Really familiarize yourself with this, because this is such a simple step in a direction that every single human being wants to go now. We're all sick and tired of the exploitation, the slavery, the abuse on every level, whether it's from government, whether it's the legal system, whether it's the financial system. Everywhere we turn, we are getting nailed and hammered and just beaten into a pulp. Very few people see a way out of this. Well, there is a very bright light at the end of this dark and gloomy tunnel that we find ourselves in. All of humanity is in the same dark and gloomy tunnel right now. And if we don't do something about it now, we may never come out of this dark and gloomy tunnel. So if you live in a small town where your mayor is elected anywhere in the world and you can take this decision, please watch the One Small Town videos, read all about it, and then take the necessary steps that are there on the website as the guidelines, onesmalltown.org. And we can turn our towns and our world into a place of prosperity and abundance beyond our wildest imagination. Until later, thank you for watching. This is Michael Tellinger.